the thing is, you're there. So the most important step you've already taken, you're there, you're ready, you've got your bib on, and there's nothing you can do about changing what you've done in your training. So it's really about now focusing on the race ahead.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who likes to collect shower caps from hotels, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 123 of the Running for Real podcast. I am thrilled you are here today. I really appreciate you, whether you are a brand new listener or have been here the whole time. Thank you so much. We are on day 6 of our special week of mental training podcasts. So far, you have heard from Damon West, Josh Leifrak, Ross Bernstein, Justin Sewer, Ben Newman. And each of them has given you tips and tools to use in your training as you prepare for your races ahead. I hope they've been helpful. And today I have a wonderful woman who's going to give you another set of new ways to work through these struggles as they come up. Dr. Carla Meijen is a sport and exercise psychologist. As you will hear, she came into the sport kind of differently, not following the typical path to picking up running. I wanted to bring Carla on the show as she came so highly recommended, but also because she's seen what the research is showing, and she works with many of the best researchers in that area in the world. Now, before we go and meet Carla and hear her answers to your questions, you've been hearing all week about my new running watch, the first watch that's taken me away from the previous brand I was using since, well, forever. I have never switched brands, even though I have tried other watches in the past. And I got my first GPS watch in 2005 when my coach put one on my wrist. I complained the whole time because I was so frustrated that he'd given me this heavy thing to wear on my wrist. If only I knew. But I've never liked any other brand until now. I absolutely love my new Corose Apex watch, and I'm not alone. You heard from Camille Herron on the show before, and she's also a huge fan of Corose, wearing it for her 24-hour world record run. They are really changing things in the GPS watch industry, and can I just talk about the battery life for a second? The battery life is just mind-blowing. I've been charging it about once every 3 weeks, and that is totally unprecedented in a watch, especially in a running watch. If you have an Apple Watch, it kind of reminds me a lot of that too, which is nice, and kind of make me wonder if I should have held off on the Apple Watch, as the Corose also looks really sleek, and I, love wearing it as a regular watch too. It does have an intelligent stride algorithm that records your range of motion during an outdoor run. And then it can also use it to work out what your pace and distance is when running indoors or through areas with bad satellite signal. So like in a tunnel or, in a big city where your GPS gets all kinds of confused. I know many of you have asked about this before and become frustrated with other brands. So even though I don't run inside often and I don't live in a huge city, it may be a big help to you. You can get a bonus watch band with your purchase by visiting tinamuir.com/Corose. That's TINAMUIR.com/COROS. And you can get more information there. Thank you to Body Health for once again supporting me and this podcast by sponsoring this episode. I've told you about Perfect Amino for years and how it helps me to recover quicker from my training and my racing. But did you know they also have a 100% money back guarantee? What do you have to lose? Nothing. Give it a try and see what you think. Visit tinamuir.com/aminos. That's TINAMUIR.com/AMINOS. Carla, thank you so much for joining me on this special week of episodes with sports psychologists and motivational speakers. I am so excited you are here with me. You are representing the females for the week because, weirdly enough, every psychologist I've had on the show, other than Andy Lane, who you know, has been a female, but this week it's all been males. So you are holding down the fort with the women. So thank you so much for being here today. And I really appreciate you giving me some time to talk.
You're welcome. Looking forward to the episode.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. And as I mentioned a minute ago, Helen and Andy Lane were the people that recommended you. And I, loved kind of following where your journey has gone. You grew up in Holland, went to university in Amsterdam, and then you went on to live in Edinburgh to do your master's there. And now I'm assuming you're living in London, where St. Mary's is, and have been various other places in the UK. But firstly, before I get on to that, this is something I haven't ever covered before, but what made you decide to want to travel, to go do your degrees and kind of move around? I mean, people tend to usually stay in the country that they are born in, or at least kind of stay close to home. I would love to hear, as someone else who did this, why did you decide to kind of go to Edinburgh for your master's degree? Why then go to London? What is it about being in England, when I think most people listening think Amsterdam or Holland would be, the ideal place to live? So why would you ever leave?
Interesting question. When I was about 17, I've always had an interest in sport, but I didn't want to become a PE teacher. That's kind of your obvious route. But I was like, that's kind of not where I see myself when I'm maybe 40, 50 years old. And I was like, well, actually, sports psychology sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
That's something I want to do. I want to be a sports psychologist. I was about 17 years old when I decided that's what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, in Holland, there was no kind of clear pathway to become a sports psychologist. So what I decided was, okay, I'm going to study kind of social mainstream psychology and then see if I can find ways to specialize, within the degree and maybe afterwards. So during my degree, I managed to get to Sweden, so to the University of Lund for 6 months to do an internship where I worked with 2 sport teams. And then I really, really fell in love with sports psychology. And I was like, this is 100% what I want to do. So I guess that's kind of setting the scene as to why I then went to the UK, which is within Europe, one of the kind of, that's the place to be if you want to grow in sports psychology.
Mm-hmm. And then so you ended up in Edinburgh and, now St. Mary's. When I left, I honestly haven't looked recently, but St. Mary's was kind of one of the pinnacle places in the UK for performance athletes. Essentially, a lot of athletes train there, but also for learning about it. So pretty cool that you've ended up there. And, you've been doing a lot of research with some very impressive people. And I've loved kind of reading a bit into that. And we're going to go into that in just a second. But from what I read about you, it says that you focus on the psychological aspects of endurance performance with a particular focus on social cognitive determinants. What does that mean for those of us who, maybe don't understand the psychological terms, maybe as well as someone who is in your field? What do you mean by social cognitive determinants?
I think simplistically said, it's about we want to consider the environment and our thoughts within that environment. So we're both kind of products of our environment, but we're also producers of our environment. So we have to consider what's happening around us and what's happening, I guess, in our brains and our thoughts. So it's kind of that interaction, very simplistically said. And furthermore, it's about kind of what we think influences what we feel, what we do. So we constantly maybe we have that thought about, this feels great, I'm really energetic. So as a result, you start to maybe push yourself a little bit more. So about behavior, start to maybe run faster. And then, you feel good about that. So that kind of that emotion that you feel is like happiness or excitement. So it's that constant kind of interaction between what we feel, what we do, and our thoughts. So it's kind of that triangle, if you like. And that's kind of at the core of that.
Okay. And then with the environment you mentioned there, so what kind of things are you referring to there? Are you literally talking about, being outside in nature, or are you kind of talking about, the supportive network you have around you who are encouraging you to, go for your dreams, or, maybe the opportunities that there are to join a running club or things like that? What kind of things do you mean by environment?
So it could be something like that. So the social support mechanisms around you, the feedback that you get from important others around you. So it might be coach feedback. It might be seeing other people being successful, who are in a kind of a similar boat as you are. It might be actually that you're out on a run and you see someone and you can catch them and you kind of speed up a little bit. So that's part of your environment as well. So it's that constant interaction between what's happening around you and your behavior, so that you are kind of influencing your environment as well, because that person who you just overtook might then like run faster to then wanting to overtake you again. So you're then a product as well as kind of a producer of your environment as such.
I see. That makes sense. And especially, I'm sure you as a female, I definitely have experienced the thing of, no offense to the men listening, where I've passed a male, haven't liked the fact that I'm a female passing them. And soon they're like on my shoulder trying to overtake me. And I'm, now I'm stubborn and like, no, you're not passing me. And so I'm speeding up, and we're just kind of, like you said, egging each other on without actually seeing anything. So I love that you mentioned that. And are there any things within that have kind of surprised you, that have had more of an impact? Maybe something that you thought, wow, I wouldn't have thought that would have affected performance or affected how people viewed their experience, that maybe you didn't know 10 years ago or something like that?
I think one of the key things that I've learned through some of the projects I've been working on is the importance of focusing on the process, especially when we consider running and cycling. Very often there's this kind of do or die goal. Mm-hmm. So you have your, I want to run a sub 3 or a sub 4 hour marathon. And that's your pure focus. And you focus so much on the outcome that you kind of forget about the process. And that's something that I found really striking through working in endurance performance. I think with endurance performance, it's maybe more so than in some other sports where it's that kind of do or die goal that really dominates people. It's that comparisons on Strava, on social media, that I find really fascinating, and how that can undermine people's self-belief. So you think you've done quite a good one, then you're comparing it to other people, and then suddenly your self-belief might be affected. So I find that really fascinating. And I think endurance performance does that a lot more than some other sports.
Interesting. And you mentioned there about focusing on the process. Now, we hear that a lot, focus on the process. You need to enjoy the journey. I say it, I'm guilty of saying it as much as anyone else. But for someone listening who maybe just, I can't understand what that means. Like, I think myself, even 4 years ago, would have been like, I don't get what that means. Like, how can it not be about the result? Like, that's why I'm doing this, What could you just give maybe some further clarification, or maybe some advice for someone who's struggling to kind of get what that means? Like, how can I enjoy struggling? How can I enjoy hard times? What would be your advice?
Yeah, I guess when we're looking at endurance performance, one of the unique demands is that kind of that voluntary decision, isn't it? To kind of expose yourself to pain. It's not that you're suddenly just go out there and decide that it's going to be not painful. It's one of those sports where you definitely expose yourself to pain. So how can you make that fun? One of the things is to change that relationship that you will have with pain, and accept that you're actually making that decision to go out and do that. So you have ownership over it. And I think for me, that's one of the key things, is you make that decision that you go out for a run and take in the scenery around you, and to focus on maybe the different ways that your body feels, the change in your body. And that, for me, that's a lot about the process. It's about, you feeling more stronger. So you're not necessarily focusing on a particular time, but it's actually about appreciating how you feel stronger through running, or how you feel more energetic, how you maybe get more ownership over your pacing, how you enjoy the environment that you're running in. So it's you making those decisions and you taking ownership over that activity.
And I guess it's kind of what running gives you, rather than just focusing on yourself, if that makes sense. I don't know if that does, but I think often, because I know this, I got so before, I don't know how much you know of me, but before I stopped running as an elite to start a family, I got so tangled up in the results and the finish line, and I couldn't see anything else. But now it's kind of about, what does running give me? It gives me, like you said, the freedom. It gives me a chance to be out in nature. It gives me a community, all these other things that are just more than a finish line or a result. That is what you're kind of taking from running. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I got of what you were saying.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear about your running journey. Now, you told me something interesting before we started recording. So tell us about how running kind of came into your life, and now why it is something that you do as well.
So actually, I'm a basketball player. So I've been playing basketball since I was maybe 15, 14, and I've always absolutely hated going out for a run. I loved it on the court. So I'm someone who would like really want to go out fast on the court, going for the fast breaks. But actually going for a 5K jog, I absolutely did not see the point of that. And that's changed over the years. So I guess I tried some jogs in, my sweatpants, like you do as a basketball player, not like a running kit or anything. And then I moved to a different university where I got my kind of first lecturing position. And endurance performance was one of the kind of key focus points there. And very slowly, I started to kind of embrace running and, go for longer runs and starting to kind of embrace the feelings of it, to really understand what some of the psychological demands were of that, as I kind of moved as a researcher from, I looked at challenge and threat states in athletes over like lots of different sports to much more of an endurance performance focus, and kind of understanding some of those psychological demands through working with endurance athletes, but also to kind of expose myself to, what it's like to have that exercise-induced discomfort and pain, and, how wrong you can get with pacing, or, what it's like when you get it right. So, yeah, I've definitely seen a massive change from quite like a slow, basketball pace, if you like, steady pace. Pacing was not in the picture anyway, because you don't do pacing when you do basketball. You just go straight as fast as you can. So actually, I can see a lot of improvements through kind of social support networks and, going out with my partner for jogs, who's a very decent runner. I've kind of really starting to enjoy it. And for me, basketball's always been competitive, and running, when I picked it up, I said, well, you know what, actually, for me, running should be enjoyable. So I'm not going to run with a watch. I'm running with a watch now. But that was kind of my intention, not to run with a watch, not to look at a time, and to only kind of go out for runs in environments that are enjoyable for me to run in.
Thank you to Body Health for sponsoring these bonus episodes of the Running for Real podcast. You've heard me talk about Body Health Perfect Amino a lot over the years. And I'm sure you've noticed that I wore the Body Health logo on my chest in the Boston Marathon. Because they've supported me for so many years and they've been with me through thick and thin, I wanted to make sure everyone knew that they were behind me and I appreciated them. Maybe you've heard me talking about it, but felt a little bit confused as to what it was. They created a page to answer your questions that are just for Running for Real fans, and you can visit it by go to tinamuir.com/aminos. That's TINAMUIR.com/AMINOS. Perfect Amino helps your body recover from tough training, something you are going to need as you work through these mental tips and tricks learned in these episodes as you have your big races coming. As many of the experts mentioned, getting your fueling and recovery right is absolutely critical. Yes, even from a mental perspective. And Body Health Perfect Amino contains the 8 essential amino acids the body needs to support and maintain its muscular, skeletal, enzymatic, and hormonal systems. The essential amino acids in Perfect Amino are in the exact proportions needed for maximum utilization by the body, and nothing else is utilized as well to make protein. You can get 10% off anything on the Body Health website, but particularly Perfect Amino, my favorite product, using code TINAMUIR10, or you can go to tinamuir.com/aminos. That's TINAMUIR.com/AMINOS.
And for me, basketball's always been competitive. And running, when I picked it up, I said, well, you know what, actually, for me, running should be enjoyable. So I'm not going to run with a watch. I'm running with a watch now. But that was kind of my intention, not to run with a watch, not to look at a time, and to only kind of go out for runs in environments that are enjoyable for me to run in.
I love that. And, how much of you going through this process was what you were kind of working on within your work, seeing, the principles you mentioned, and how much of it was, I see all these people and they talk about how much they love running, and it seems like it, maybe I'm missing something. Was that any part of it, kind of seeing people and being like, I hate running, but there must be something good about it for all these people to kind of be obsessed with it? Did that come into it, or was it kind of just a temptation of testing out the principles you were working on?
I think a lot of it was kind of testing the principles I was working with, see if I could push myself through it. I know I can do it in the gym. I know I can do it in a basketball court. Can I also do this in like a continuous fashion? So the difference with endurance sports is that it's whole body continuous exercise. Mm-hmm. It's not start stopping, but you keep going. So can I actually do that using some of those psychology principles? So that's one thing. And definitely I was very inspired by some of the work that I've done. So I've set up a cycling team in the UK. So that's a concept that's actually coming from America. So some colleagues, Kate Hayes and Chelsea Day, they've set up some really inspirational cycling teams. Kate Hayes at Toronto Marathon and Chelsea at the Columbus Marathon, where there's loads of runners. And what they do is they provide support to runners at all levels. Before, during, and after the marathon. So we're actually there during the marathon as well on the course to run along with people if they want us to.
Like to encourage them?
Yeah, so to talk them back, like get their head back into the race. So it might be, mile 15, 20, they're really starting to struggle. And so they can fetch you over and say, oh, do you want to jog with me for a little while? And then you say, okay, how's it going? What are you struggling with? And then you kind of talk them through some strategies to get their head back into the race. And I found it so inspirational. Yeah. So many people I spoke to at the expo and then during the actual event, that it didn't matter who they were, where they were coming from, what their background was, but they were there and they were, running a half or a full marathon. And I found it so inspirational that I thought, well, actually, I want to do more running. And if they can do it, then we can all do it.
Mm-hmm. I love that example. And it's so powerful, isn't it? Having someone say something to you in a race. I've actually done that a few times. I did it when I was pregnant. I ran alongside some friends in their marathon for a few miles. And then another friend I did for a mile. And I remember specifically, I jumped into her group and I was talking to her like, Anna, you're strong. I know this is a tough patch. And I could tell that everyone in the group was listening to be like, I'm giving her like a pep talk and everyone in the group is like listening to what I'm saying and kind of using it themselves. And we all know how powerful it is having someone say stuff like that. So I love that they do that. And that's so cool that inspired you on as well. Now, on that note, you have done, one of your research papers has been about motivational self-talk.
Yes.
And you did that with Samuel? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, Sam. Yeah, I always call him Sam.
Okay.
Alistair McCormick was the main kind of lead researcher on that project.
I'd heard of Sam, but I hadn't heard of Alistair. And I don't know where or why, but I definitely recognize the name. So tell us, what did you find with that? Because, what you were talking about there was talk from other people, but self-talk can be especially powerful. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so self-talk is that internal dialogue that we have with ourselves, and it can be strategic. So you kind of have a plan beforehand that you're going to use, or more reflexive, so that you're kind of on the spot, come up with kind of ways of reframing the types of things that you say to yourself. So it might be things like, I want to stop, can't keep going this pace. You might recognize some of those things. So in this study, what we did, it was an overnight race. So it was a 60-mile race where the participants were not supported. So they had the map, they had lamps, lights, and they were kind of navigating their own way. And they had a time cutoff point. And what we did 2 weeks beforehand, Alistair interviewed them about their kind of sports psychology experiences. And he then either gave them a motivational self-talk workbook or a control workbook, where we asked them to do a concentration kind of grid task that we knew didn't work, but that would kind of match for effort, if you like. So a lot of kind of studies, they don't necessarily have a control condition that matches for effort. So that was quite unique about this study. And so within the motivational self-talk workbook, we asked them to reflect on the kind of self-talk that they're currently engaged in, identify the ones that would work, and then practice that in that kind of 2-week period up to that overnight race. So what we found is that there was a slightly better finishing time, but when you think about a 60 miles, so 60 miles, yeah, okay. 60. Yep. So there's so many things that can go wrong. So people misnavigated, so they went into the wrong direction to then come back. So the fluctuations in time were massive. So although we didn't find a significant effect in time, what we did find is that most people who did the self-talk intervention, the motivational self-talk intervention, were still using it 6 months after. And they actually, in the qualitative feedback, they said that they really found it beneficial. So although there wasn't like a very big performance effect, there was kind of a well-being effect, if you like, that they found it very useful in comparison to kind of the active control condition. And this is generally what we find, is that in another study that was much more lab-based, so much more controlled, that Sam conducted with some colleagues in Bangor University in the UK, they actually found that it did benefit performance. So motivational self-talk, things like, I can do this, keep it up, keep going, those types of phrases, keep them short and brief, they can definitely be beneficial.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. That's helpful to hear and interesting. And yeah, I totally understand in a 60-mile race, there are a lot of variables that you can't control, especially overnight. A lot of things can go wrong.
But a very exciting study.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to move into the main part of this interview where I'm asking you these questions about someone who has a big race coming up in about 3 months. So they want to know, what should they be doing to kind of mentally prepare? What they're ready to do, some mental training this time. I really want to get this race right. I know this is something I've struggled with. If you could give us maybe 2 to 3 things they could work on in that next 3 months, what would you suggest based on what you have found?
So I think 3 months is a great time period to start incorporating your mental skills. So before I give those 3 tips, for me, what's really important is to incorporate the physiology and the nutrition and the physical aspect with the psychology. So I don't think you can separate them. They're all kind of integrated.
It's not like you've done your run and then you say, okay, now I'm going to sit down and do an hour of mental training. It doesn't work that way.
Exactly, because it might well be that you've not taken enough liquids or not enough energy gels, and therefore you were off. So it wasn't just down to the mental side of it, but then that can then cause you to be really struggling and getting those negative thoughts. So one of the kind of first things that I would advise people to do is during their longer training runs is to afterwards reflect on what some of the critical situations were during that training run. So what went well? So often we forget to reflect on what went well. So what were the types of things that went really well? And what were some of the kind of things that they might have struggled with? So it might be that they told themselves, oh, that hill, I can't keep up the pace in that hill. So I really struggle with that hill. Okay, so that might be some kind of critical situation. And then it's starting to think about what some strategies might be that can help you with that. So it might be self-talk. So one of the things is you might want to develop your own mantra. And what's important with developing your own mantra is that you want to keep it brief. So it needs to be like a very short phrase or a word, memorable, needs to feel right for you. And it can be motivational. So what I said earlier on, you can do it, or instructional. So it might be run tall might be more of like an instructional kind of mantra. So that's something that can be quite useful as a kind of a plan to put in place when maybe you think about that hill. I don't think I can do that. So you think about, okay, what's a mantra? And maybe that would be run strong. So that's one of the runners at the London Marathon. That's kind of her motto, is to run strong.
So can I just pause you there? So do you think it should kind of change throughout your race? Like, if you have a hill coming up, you have maybe run strong, but maybe on a later part in the race where all the hills are done and it's flat, your mantra is, like you said, run tall, because maybe you start to slump forward. Should it change, or should it be one throughout that you just use for the race?
You can be definitely adaptable with it. So it might be what you do is you split up the race in different pieces, and that you have a different mantra or a different self-talk strategy for the different parts of the race. So it might be that when you think about the London Marathon, when there's like 45,000 runners or something, that at the start it's like, there's so many people, and that your mantra would be run my own race, steady pace, even Steven, or something like that. So that's one strategy. So you can think about developing your mantra and adjust that in relation to maybe a critical situation, such as going off too fast or struggling with a hill or being sluggish on maybe the flat. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing is you can consider the goals that you're setting. So what a lot of people do is they set a do or die goal. So they have like one goal and then that's it. Can be useful sometimes, but on race day, So it's useful for kind of your training efforts, but on race days, I'm going to help you. You've done all your training. So what you want to start practicing is to have a little bit of flexibility within your goals. So it might be that you have a dream goal. So something that goes, the conditions are perfect. You've hydrated well. There are no queues for the toilets. You're all there. And it's like the dream goal. That's the one you're going for. And then you can have your happy goal. So it's still a good day, but maybe not a PB day. And then you have your kind of your bare minimum, your acceptable goal. And so being able to kind of give you that flexibility might help you to be putting less pressure on yourself by just having that dream goal. And when it doesn't work out, you're abandoning it and you're not having any kind of enjoyment or fun during the race. So
should it be, let's say you're running along and let's say the morning and the build-up has been kind of, okay, this is looking like it's a dream goal day. I'm, a few miles in, things are looking good, but then something goes wrong. Should it be that you kind of say, all right, well, I guess my dream goal is not happening, but I can still achieve my next goal. And then maybe you go through another struggle in the race and you say, well, I'll just deal with my acceptable goal. Or should you kind of not kind of abandon ship? And, I'm just trying to imagine people kind of getting to a certain point, a bad point, and thinking, well, my happy goal's out the window, when actually it might not be. You might just be in a rough patch and you're going to make up the time later on. Yeah, exactly. So it's about evaluating where you are in the race and how you're feeling. So we had a really interesting, sorry, I'm branching up a little bit here, but still having to do with a strategy. We had a Q&A the other week about this, and it depends on the weather conditions. So what we tend to do is we have a dream goal or happy goal and a pacing strategy that goes with it. But actually on the day, it's very windy. And so it might be that the first half is actually a lot slower than the second half because of, where the wind's coming from, or maybe some rain or hills, and you've not quite prepared for that. So that's obviously important to prepare for the course and knowing how to plan for that. And so what then happens is that maybe you go from your dream goal to your happy goal, but actually then you realize that it's going all right. I can push a little bit further and go back to that happy goal. Okay. So it just allows you that flexibility. And then what you can do within that is you can monitor how your body feels. So you can use different, what we call attentional strategies, where it might be that you're taking an outward focus, where you take in the weather conditions. So you say, let's say every 2 miles, you say, okay, every 2 mile marker, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take in the weather conditions, evaluate. Then I'm going to feel how my body feels. So maybe the rate of perceived exertion that I'm experiencing at that particular moment. I'm going to visualize the course, how I'm going to run tall, and then focus on the next point, maybe the next tree or the next kind of corner. So you give yourself something to do during the race to then help you evaluate where you are at that particular moment. And so that also helps you to move away from some of those worries and concerns and a kind of do and die goal. And this is something that you can practice in the lead up to a race. So that's something really useful to do in the 3 months leading up to a race. So, it might be that you put an alarm on your watch or something, kind of forcing you every 5 minutes that it does beep, beep, and say, okay, now I'm going to focus on the weather. What does it feel like? I'm going to evaluate how hard it is. I'm going to focus on my strides. So what's my pace, my strides pace at the moment? Am I running tall? Okay, great. Next, 5 or 10 minutes, whatever works for you. Love that.
So you're kind of forcing yourself to practice during your training sessions, because this is sometimes what we don't do. We say, okay, well, yeah, great. Okay, I got a mantra. I've practiced that, but you don't do it consistently. So you want to kind of force yourself during those training sessions to actively practice some of those strategies. So what I've covered, the goal setting, maybe those attention, like shifting your attention, checking in with your body, checking in with the environment, and also kind of maybe practicing those self-talk strategies for different parts of the training run.
Okay, love that. Thank you. That's really helpful. And did you have any more? That was the 2.
Let's go with those. Yeah, there's a lot more.
No, that's absolutely fine. Okay, I just didn't want to cut you off before I move to the next question. All right, let's talk about a few weeks out. So maybe it's 3 weeks before the race. Listeners or runners might be thinking, I should be able to run my pace. I want this dream goal. I want this time. Why can't I run the pace? I don't even know if I'm going to finish this race. It's too much. How am I even going to finish the race? All those thoughts are just going through, like, this is too much. what would be your advice to someone there?
I think there's a couple of different things. So obviously the first one is the shoulds, isn't it? So that's not a very rational way of thinking if you constantly tell yourself, I should do this. Mm-hmm. So it's more, I would like to run this particular pace. So it's about checking in whether that particular pace is realistic for you. Have you ever been able to run that pace? So that's a question to ask yourself, and also to consider that actually on race day, you tend to run faster than you do on some of your longer runs. So it's about being realistic with that kind of pace. So I guess that's one of those. So should is not the most helpful word in the world, because it does kind of lead to some kind of irrational thoughts. And it's also, it's not just about that one event. You're still training as, if you identify as a runner, you're still training for what comes after the event. And then the other thing is what happens is when we think about our self-belief, or kind of in sports psychology terms, they call it self-efficacy. What we tend to do is we tend to let ourselves be affected by negative events a lot more than by positive events. So it takes a lot longer to build it up through positive events than it is to break it down by a negative event. So what happens maybe is someone's a couple of weeks out and had one run where they felt sluggish and it didn't feel so good. But that affects their self-belief and, those kind of worries about can I actually finish a lot more than all those positive runs. So what I would advise is to really reflect on how your training has gone. What has gone well? Have you had experiences of pushing through difficult times? And then use that to take with you on race day. That you actually say, well, you know what? I really struggled there, but I managed to get through that. So maybe think about how your nutrition works with that. So if you say, well, actually, I'm really struggling with, a particular point in a race or in my training sessions. Okay, maybe what I'm going to do is half a mile before that, I'm taking an energy gel or something like that. So it's about being very strategic and combining those different areas, the physiology, the physical, the pacing, the psychological aspects, to kind of regain some of that confidence.
I love that. Okay, great. That is really helpful. And something that people can use, over and over again. That's something that you can go back to often, especially reflecting back on the training and the things that have gone well. You can, read your training journal many times, especially with things like Strava. You can go look at it every day if you want to. All right. So what about race week? Now you are feeling sluggish, you're tapering, you're tired, excited, but at the same time, really scared. What should listeners be doing in the few days before the race?
So don't try to do anything you wouldn't normally do. I guess that's a bit of advice. So I guess it's that, your body feels, I'm going through it at the moment. So my partner is running the London Marathon and is going through the taper. And it's about not necessarily wanting to go out for a really fast run just before. So allowing your body to rest and be excited for race day and have a plan. So I think that's the most important thing is, you can start packing your bag, have a kind of a list. So you're not worrying about forgetting something, because that's what people are starting to think about. Except that the tapering week is a bit of a weird one. All you want to do is you want to go out and run and kind of test your legs. Do your legs still kind of move, or are they still powerful? But it's about accepting that actually tapering is there for a reason, and reframing that thought that actually sluggish might mean that on race day you actually feel more energy. Make decisions on what you're going to do with your nutrition. So I think that's really important. So instead of thinking, no, I'm eating so much, I'm not exercising, it's actually what you're doing is you're filling and fueling your body to be ready for race day. So it's about reinforcing yourself with that belief that actually this is my tapering plan. So set a goal for tapering week. Maybe that's the best way of phrasing it. So we set a goal for our training, but maybe we don't always set a goal for our tapering week. So your goal for tapering week might be to have a particular nutrition plan where you make sure that you're properly fueled up and you know exactly what you're going to do every day, and allow yourself to rest and relax. So you're, kind of rewarding yourself before going out and have that run. And then you're going to be excited because those legs can go. And I think that's sometimes what we don't do, is not having a process goal for tapering week.
I love that. And on that note, I think, another thing you could add to that with your nutrition plan. I mean, surely if you were going to a destination race or somewhere that's not comfortable, you can look up restaurants to go to, not just before the race to make sure you've got those foods you want, but also after the race, something to celebrate, somewhere you really want to like treat yourself as a well done to what you've done. That can be good to occupy the mind as well. Is there anything else you would add to kind of occupying the mind during this time? Is it good to watch motivational movies, or will they kind of maybe push someone a bit? Because I find that compared to most other sports need to like get hyped up, get like, I'm ready. I need to kind of, maybe you had this with basketball. I need to focus and be in the zone. But running, I think often you have to actually do the opposite and kind of pull yourself back and keep calming yourself down in the days before. So would motivational movies help? Would it be good to kind of watch other things, spend time with family? What any other things you would suggest for the mind?
I think I would definitely suggest not to do something that's very different from what you'd normally do. If you normally don't watch motivational videos, then it's probably not going to make a big difference doing that in a week before. Maybe it makes you even more nervous because you're like, well, I can't really relate to any of this. So what have I done wrong? And it just makes you worry a lot more about your training. So you do want to occupy your mind, because obviously sitting on the sofa instead of like going out for a run or might give you a lot of time to think. So it's about, keeping yourself busy. So it might be that you are reading a book, if that's something what you like doing. Most people work, so they still have the work as a distraction. Mm-hmm. So it's about making sure that you maybe plan some things to do in a week before, but make sure that they're not too kind of intense, so that you're not on the day before the marathon, go shopping for hours with, your family. I've heard someone do that and they say they regretted that a lot because they were so tired from dragging around the kind of shopping malls all day.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because I think that's a really important point to everyone listening. It's very tempting, especially when you're in a new place, to be like, oh, I'm going to go meet my friend who lives here and I never get to see them. We're going to walk and go out for lunch. But you end up running around all over the place, wasting your energy. So get them to come to you. Like, ask if you have a friend who's not racing or not running, get them to come to you. If they are running, then have them meet somewhere in the middle. And don't, like you said, Carla, go for a walk around, go somewhere, just actually go sit somewhere, sit in a coffee shop, have a tea or whatever, something. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's something that we can all fall into the trap of, getting excited by where we are and then walking around all over the place. So thank you. All right. So let's talk about race morning. Someone's almost shaking with nerves. They're so scared, feeling a lot of pressure, thinking, what if I wasted all this time I spent training? My family gave up a lot to let me get my training in. What would you say to that person who's just feeling very nervous and scared about performing?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that we come across a lot in the cycling team work when we're there in the corals and we speak to runners like literally, 10, 20 minutes before they go out. And the first question I always ask them is like, how are you feeling? And then that's so many times the story gets like, people almost tear up in front of you and really feel really emotional about it. And so quite often it's about feeling nervous, feeling concerned. They've not necessarily done all the training. And the thing is, you're there. So the most important step you've already taken, you're there, you're ready, you've got your bib on and ready to go. So there's nothing you can do about changing what you've done in your training. So it's really about now focusing on the race ahead. And it's about then embracing some of the psychological techniques, such as relaxation. So sometimes what I then do is I stand with the runner and kind of talk them through some relaxation strategies. So it might be that I do some breath counts with them to kind of really calm them down, because it's not very helpful if you're there super emotional and, your heart's in your throat, and what's happening then to your breathing is it's all over the shot. Yeah. And we know that for running, breathing is probably one of the most important things. So if you then start to like breathe really up high to your shoulders instead of breathing to your belly, then that's not something that when you start is going to be very efficient. You're wasting a lot of energy straight at the start. And I'm not a physiologist, but that's something that is something that's very relevant, and where really psychology and physiology marry up very strongly. So you can talk them through breathing strategies to really calm them down and then focus on the process again. And what I usually do is I ask them to recall successful training runs. So I said, what worked for you in training? and really maybe a song that they played when they were doing training sessions. So although a lot of races don't allow music, what they do allow is for you to sing that song in your head.
Yeah.
So, there's nothing there that prevents you from doing that. So if there's a song that's really powerful for you and that gives you a lot of energy or excitement, then that's something you can do to then keep your worries away during those times. And so one of the other things that we do with the cycling team is that we give out bits of finish line ribbon. So it's kind of symbolic. So we give pieces of finish line ribbon that people can put on their shirt. So they can pin that on their shirt. And what we usually tell people is that there's 2 rules to it. So the first rule is to get it across the finish line. Mm-hmm. And the second rule is to associate a reason for running or a mantra or maybe a psychological technique to it. So when they get to a point in the race where they struggle and they see this colorful bit of finish line ribbon on their shirt, that reminds them of maybe the reason why they're running. So it might be that they are running for family. A lot of people run for charities that are really important and close to their heart. So that might be something, or it might be one of those mantras that we talked about, like run tall or something like that. Or it might be that it's a breathing reminder. So whatever you've kind of discussed with them at the start, that is then a kind of a visual reminder for them to keep going. And that's a nice distraction when you talk to them at the kind of the start of a race, to really reflect on, okay, I'm not going to change anything dramatically, but actually I've had some really good moments in my training sessions, and everyone can reflect on at least something that went well in their training sessions that they can take with them.
Great. Thank you so much. That's really easy to incorporate, and some good strategies that, I could even imagine standing next to you in the corral, even hearing you say that. So that was really visual. Thank you so much for that. All right. And let's talk about during the race. Someone is in a hard patch, maybe mile 15 of a marathon, mile 8 of a half, feeling like they have a long way to go. Temptation to drop out becomes, very loud in their ear. You mentioned earlier saying, I'm going to stop. I can't carry on. What can someone do to pull themselves back, in addition to obviously the strategies we mentioned earlier, like mantras and, thinking about your purpose for doing this?
I think they are in good company. About 95% of people we surveyed. So we surveyed 760 odd people exactly about that kind of those thoughts around the urge to stop or slow down beyond what you've planned. And 95%, I mean, that's a lot of people said that they've experienced that thought. So probably pretty much every runner you'll speak to will say that they've experienced that thought. So again, it's about, okay, you probably had that thought during your longer runs. What did you do to get yourself through that? And if you know beforehand that there will be a certain time in the race that might happen, it's about, okay, so if I see the 14-mile point, I'm going to do something. So it might be, actually, I'm going to take an energy gel, or I know that there's a water point there. So actually what I know is after mile 15, there's going to be a water point that I'm going to run to. So it's about knowing the course beforehand. And if you know that you're going to struggle at some of those stages, it's about those very small strategies, so small steps to keep yourself going for at least another mile. Mm-hmm. And then when you've done another mile, you're like, actually, this is okay. Let's do another mile. And it's about, again, checking in with how you're feeling. It might be that actually you started off way too fast. So it's no surprise that you're feeling a little bit, sore, that level of discomfort. So it's about, okay, so I can slow down a little bit to the next mile point and then kind of reevaluate my pacing strategy. Yeah. So it's about those little things that you can do and maybe work from mile point to mile point, and then set different little small process goals for each of those mile points. I think you said you've had Andy Lane in the show. One of the things that he sometimes says is that he'll put a lasso around people.
Yes, that was a really
and
good
then
one. Reel them
push
in.
themselves towards them. So that's something you can kind of consider. It might be that you're thinking about a song that you might really like, and you might sing that song. Some people rebuild their house. So they think about, okay, I'm actually going to redecorate my house. So what would my living room look like? Okay, so maybe I could put the sofa there, or I can put it there. So to distract themselves from that thought.
Cool.
So for some people, it doesn't work. That's kind of that dissociative strategy. But for some, it can be a nice little distraction. And then suddenly they're at like the next mile marker and you'd be like, okay, that wasn't that bad.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. That's really helpful. Thank you. All right, let's talk after the race. So first we'll talk if the race went well. Someone really enjoyed the race. They ran that dream goal or they ran that happy goal. They're feeling good. But it's a few days later, the feeling has subsided, feeling a little lost. You know, what do I do now? I've completed my goal. Where do I go next? What would you say?
Yeah, I think that's quite common, those post-marathon blues, because you worked so hard for that particular event. It's not that I guess some people do a marathon every week, but most people maybe do one or two a year. So I guess the first thing is to consider your body. So be kind to your body and relax. Allow your body some time to recover and reward it for its efforts. So it might be that what you do is you plan a spa day the week coming up after the event. So it's kind of as a reward.
Get a pedicure for those feet that are...
Oh gosh, yeah. I can imagine. So it might be finding a new activity to take your mind off those kind of post-marathon blues. So it might be that you're going to spend more time with your family that week or with friends, or do a different sporting activity once your body's recovered. Give yourself some time off to reflect on your achievements. So maybe you want to write a blog or in your journal. Mm-hmm. It might be that you want to set a new goal and kind of look for the next event, or maybe you want to kind of reward yourself for what you've done. And another thing is look forward to the next 5K run with no pressure, what that's like. So where there's no kind of training goal, but you just go out and run.
Yeah, love that.
Because that's still the thing though, isn't it? I mean, you've done the marathon, but if you truly enjoy running, it's about just going out, do it and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. So true. Thank you. That's helpful. All right. And then what about if it goes badly? Someone feels like they mentally gave up. Everyone else has had an amazing race and they haven't, and they just can't feel like they can't let it go, as they just feel like they failed. What would you say now?
Good question. And I think that's something, again, that's fairly common. Some of the work that we do with runners, they say, well, I really beat myself up about missing, that sub whatever time with a few minutes. And everyone else is doing it. So the first thing I would say is stop comparing yourself to other people, especially with, Strava, Twitter, Map My Run and all the kind of different apps. What you tend to do is to constantly compare yourself, and what you're worth isn't depending on what other people are doing. So your self-worth is much more than just your comparison to other people. So for me, that's, I guess, the key thing. And it's not as easy as it sounds. So it's about reflecting on what did you do well in the race? So did you finish it? If you didn't finish it, what are some of the learning points that you can take away from it? Maybe your preparation didn't go as well as you kind of hoped for. Maybe there were family circumstances that prevented you from, putting in the miles that you were hoping to. And you still, maybe managed to do some of that training. So it's about kind of rewarding yourself what you did manage. And were there some kind of learning points in terms of actually maybe you did develop some new mental strategies that you can move with you into kind of new events. Mm-hmm. So it's about trying to be less kind of hard on yourself, because there's nothing you can do to change. So at that moment, you've done the race, you've had that time, and it's about, okay, what can I learn from this? What were good points? What were development points? And take that with you. Because if you're going to use one race and still be harsh on yourself about that particular race years after, and that happens, people still, vent to themselves about a race that they dropped out of 5-6 years ago, sometimes even 10 years ago. That's costing a lot of energy, because you're constantly going over that in your mind. And so it's about, okay, what can I do to accept it? So maybe talk about that race in a funny voice. So you kind of it's like moving away from that, where you actually think, well, you know what, it's happened. It now just looks like a funny story, and I can put that in a storybook, put that in the cupboard, or, put that away and then move on from it. So give yourself some time, because it's a bit like grief, isn't it? Because you feel something, you lost something. Maybe you lost that time that you were looking to do. So maybe give yourself a little bit of time, maybe an hour or something to really grieve about that and then move away from it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. And then, those are the main ones I had, but just kind of wrapping up here. Is there anything you'd like to remind listeners about, goals that they have and, the things that they want to achieve that we haven't discussed so far?
I think one of the key things is that kind of do or die goal. Try to move away from that a little bit. I know it can be helpful to fuel that motivation during your longer training runs, but on the day you've done your work. So then it's really focusing on the process, breaking up the race in different pieces and set a different goal for the different parts of the race. So I guess that's one of the things. The other one that I haven't mentioned yet, but there's some research that recently came out that has demonstrated the positive effects of smiling. So when you are struggling, break into a smile like Kipchoge did during his world record, his successful world record in Berlin, where he really talked about the benefits of smiling, because that can help you to kind of give that excitement back and, maybe combine that with a mantra like run tall, run strong to really push yourself to the end of the race.
Great. Or you could even say run happy and then you'll
run happy. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We are just going to answer the final 4 questions, and I want to, get people to find out where they can follow you in future. So do you have one piece of advice you would like to give the listeners for life?
I guess for me, it's about enjoying the route and be okay with any detours that might come on the way. So be curious about what's around the corner rather than trying to jump around it and get agitated that it takes a bit longer. So really embrace the route.
So good. That's so good and can be applied to anything. I love that. All right. One person to follow on social media and why?
There's it's not a person, but it's a social media account by Action for Happiness.
Is it called Action for Happiness?
Yes.
Okay.
So they have calendars, monthly calendars with different things you can do on a day-to-day basis based on different themes. So I think the theme of April is be active. So it might be like go out for a little walk tonight or something like that. So they have very small, manageable things you can do on a day-to-day basis. It's quite inspirational.
Great, thank you.
And obviously Andy Lane is a good one to follow as well.
A good one. Yep. I will allow you to have 2 because he is the one that introduced us in the first place. And is that what was the happiness one again? Just one more time.
Action for Happiness.
Action for Happiness. Is that Instagram and Twitter, or where is that you follow that?
They are on Twitter. Okay. I guess they might be on Instagram as well.
Yeah, I would imagine probably so. Yeah. Okay. How do you want to be remembered on this show?
Gosh, good question. From a sports psychology perspective, I guess I'd like to be remembered as someone who works with people to make them more aware of why they're doing what they're doing and to embrace the enjoyment of the activity they're doing.
Love that. Thank you so much. All right. And finally, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to do a running for real moment, if you're okay with that, which is, maybe since you've become a runner, something that has come to your realization that runners do that you never thought maybe you would do before. So something that maybe you'd seen runners doing and now you're doing it, or maybe you just kind of never even considered it and now you're doing this. Anything you can think of?
Good question. I was actually thinking about the other question you initially put on. So one of the things that I never thought I'd do, and I'm actually doing now, is running with a watch.
Yeah,
so I never did that.
Do you look at the pace or you just have it on you?
I look at the pace, although I went for a run earlier today and the GPS didn't really work very well. So suddenly it moved from like 6K to 7K within a minute. So that was the fastest kilometer I ever ran.
That's funny.
It's something that I'm still learning to do, kind of trying to look at it, but not be obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I never thought I would buy a watch and use a watch. It's something I've kind of started to learn to do, to see my own improvements. and slowly, I guess, becoming more competitive, which is something I never ever thought I would do with running. So,
I love that.
That's, I guess, something.
No, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. And I just, as you led into that perfectly, I just want to give one more shout out to Coros for actually sponsoring this episode, which has become my new favorite GPS watch after many, many years of using the same one. So, Carla, tell me, how can people find you, follow you in the future if they want to kind of learn what you're up to, learn what you're researching at the moment?
So they can find me on Twitter. So it's Carla Meijen is my kind of Twitter handle. They can also, if they find it really interesting, there's a book I've edited that's coming out next month.
Oh, great.
So that's at the moment on Amazon and on some other websites. And that's called Endurance, Performance in Sport, Psychological Theory and Interventions.
Oh, cool. I will put links in the show notes, and I'm sure people will be very interested in that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate all that you've given us with these tips and tricks people can actually use and take on into their own training. Thank you so much for your time, and look forward to kind of seeing what research studies you come up with next.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
My friends, if you have a minute and you could leave a review on your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or whatever else podcast player you use to listen to this podcast. Or if you would subscribe to this podcast, you will help me get out in front of new runners to make our tribe even bigger and even better. It might not seem like you as one person can make a difference, but really it helps a lot. And it shows me you appreciate the hard work I put in for those. Thank you so much. Lots of skills I've never heard before in that one, and I loved Carla's perspective coming from someone who was not originally a runner. I especially liked her advice about taper time, reminding us that it's actually really normal to feel sluggish, like we want to check, we want to suddenly haven't lost our fitness, which is what we often have an urge to do. I'll be using her words of advice in my future races, and I hope you do too. You can find links to everything we talked about today in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 123. And tomorrow is our final episode in this mental training week, and it is with Jonathan Fader. Jonathan has one of the most watched TED Talks of the year, just a really amazing conversation. He's a big runner, and I just think you're going to love this conversation. So be ready to finish off with a good one, and I'm really excited for you to hear it. Happy Saturday, my friends. I'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.